Alhambra, there was a company formed in 1919 by Scottish and Provincial Theatres to build a second theatre in Dunfermline, which was the Alhambra. And they got the funds together and started building the theatre. And then Scottish and Provincial Theatres started to get a bit rocky, so they formed a separate company called Alhambra Dunfermline Limited.
Okay.
And they took over the building. But before the theatre was finished, they were running out of funds.
Okay.
And one example, I did a research in the Scottish Record Office, and I came across a letter from the company who provided the original seating. And they were owed, I think it was around £800 or £900 for seating, and they were going to put a claim in against the Alhambra Dunfermline, but they didn't have the money, so it would meant that the Alhambra Dunfermline would have gone bankrupt, and the whole thing would have fallen. But they managed to come to an arrangement so that for the first 3 or 4 years they would get their money back over that period, whereas if they tried to make them bankrupt, they'd get nothing.
Okay.
And there was quite a few firms in a similar position. James Scott and Company, who did the electrical work, plasterers, decorators, all sorts of trades. And by the end of 1923, they'd all been paid back they'd been able to raise the money to pay them back.
Okay.
Is that also the reason, may I ask, why it took so long to construct the theatre? I remember reading that it took about 2 years.
Yeah, plus at the end of the First World War there was a shortage of both skilled labour and building materials. At the end of the First World War, they didn't want theatres or public buildings built, they wanted housing built.
Yeah, of course.
So that was what slowed down the progress of the building of the theatre. The theatre opened in August 1922, I think it was the 14th. The day before it opened, they ran a charity concert for the local hospital, so getting in the good books with the local folks. And then it opened with a film, because when they were building it, cinemas were starting to take over from a lot of theatres. So they made their options. They put a cinema operating box up the back, so they could operate it as either a cinema or a theatre. And for the first, I think it was about the first 12 months, they tried to run it as a theatre. As I said, Dunfermline had 2 theatres at that time. You had Dunfermline Opera House, and it had been going since 1907. And of course, the person who had the Opera House, Henry Hare, he had a good working relationship with all the theatrical agents. So they were having difficulties booking acts to perform here. So it was getting into further difficulties, so that they set up a meeting with Henry Hare, and they decided to combine both the Opera House and the Alhambra. And they said to Henry Hare that if he ran it for 5 years, he could become the managing director of both theatres. And at the end of that period, if he wanted to, he could continue on that basis, or just go back to running the Opera House. So that was what happened. But after 2 years, they decided that this was really too big for Dunfermline having the 2 theatres. So they decided to run it as a cinema from 1924. So from 1924 until 1964, it was a cinema. And from 64 until 2007, it was a bingo hall.
Yeah.
It had the occasional shows being run, but as you said, it was originally run by Alhambra Dunfermline Limited.
Okay.
And then in 1948, it was taken over by J.B. Milne.
Yeah, that's the
of
person
Dundee.
we have the most information on.
J.B. Milne of Dundee took over the running of the Alhambra. And then in 1958, J.B. Milne did a swap of various cinemas with Caledonian Associated Cinemas.
Yeah.
Yes, we did read about Caledonian Associated Cinema having something to do with the Alhambra Theatre, but there is like a lack of information about those from the 50s till the 80s.
Yeah.
Like it's massive, and we couldn't find any information.
Caledonian Associated Cinemas already at that time were running the Regal Cinema in Dunfermline, which was actually slightly bigger than this. And they also had, by then, bought the cinema in Eastport. The building is still there. They split it into three, and it was called Orient Express for a wee while. And then it was, when they opened the big Odeon out at the leisure park, it just went flat. So it was a sports bar and other things in it, and it's been laying empty for about 7 or 8 years now, the cinema in Eastport. But CAC was a big Scottish organisation that owned cinemas all over Scotland. It was run from Inverness.
But wasn't JB Milne also the same thing then?
JB Milne was also a big operation, but not as big as CAC.
Okay.
JB Milne was run from Dundee.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And did the cinema go from JB Milne to the Caledonia, or
Yeah.
did they kind of like put
No,
it together?
no. As I said, they actually swapped cinema buildings. CAC took over Alhambra because it already had cinemas in Dunfermline, and they also took over one or two other of Milne's cinemas, and they gave him some of theirs. So
Okay.
it's a quid pro quo arrangement, you know.
Which makes sense because I think in JB Milne's obituary it doesn't say that he owned the Alhambra, because at the end he'd pass it on
That's
to CAC.
right, yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so that's the talent that we had then, which is the AB King, which is wrong. JB Milne, then CAC, and then a bingo club,
Yeah.
and then reopened in 2008.
Yeah, well, CAC ran the Alhambra, the bingo here, up until I think it was mid-80s.
Yeah.
And then it was Carlton Bingo that took
Carlton
over
Bingo.
from there. And then Carlton ran it from the mid-80s until they built the big new bingo place out at the leisure park. And they said they were going to run both. And they ran both for about 8 months, and then they closed this. And it lay empty for a year. And then Bill bought the building and turned it back into what it was originally intended for.
Okay, and so what do you reckon is like the most pivotal points in the history of the Alhambra?
Well, the fact that it was only a theatre for 2 years, and it was a cinema for 40 years, bingo hall for 40 years, and then a year dark, and then back to becoming a theatre again.
Yeah, and that's also something that we were wondering when we were talking with our bigger group back in St Andrews, is it was a bingo hall for such a long time, and we were wondering in the community what was their role in it reopening as a cinema, or if there was a relationship there, or what was the reason that it was kept, I mean in this state as well, for so long, and then reopened as a cinema.
Did people fight to keep the theatre?
Yeah, there was a petition raised because they'd already seen, I don't know if you probably won't know the story of Dunfermline Opera House. They built the Kingsgate shopping centre, but the Opera House was sat on the fringes of it, so they needed the ground. It was a Grade B listed building, but that didn't save it. But what it did save was the interior, which was a beautiful interior. It's now in Sarasota, in the Oswego Centre in Sarasota. That was the only way they got to demolish it, was to save the interior, and said, oh, we'll build a new theatre in Dunfermline, we'll use the interior.
Yeah.
No, they sold it off
To
an American company, and they used the interior to build the theatre in Sarasota, a solo centre.
So the Opera House wasn't conserved as well?
No. So when, as I say, it ran as a bingo hall, when it shut, everybody thought, oh no, the same's going to happen again. So there was a petition raised, and when Bill bought it, he was persuaded to think about reopening as a theatre, and that's what actually happened.
Okay.
Was the petition called Raw? We saw it in the Alhambra Theatre. Alhambra in the Raw.
And it was called in the Raw because when it first opened, there was no proper lighting, there was no sound, there was no flying equipment. So the reason it was in the Raw was doing things that we were able to do with what was here, to raise the money to get it up and running properly.
Okay.
That was Alhambra in the Raw.
Okay.
And so would you have any idea why it's called the Alhambra?
Not really, no. There was 2 or 3 theatre cinemas in Scotland called the Alhambra. There was the Alhambra in Glasgow, which was a huge theatre. There was Alhambra in Stirling, and there was also an Alhambra in Perth. There was one in Perth as well.
So it was a trend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was just a name that seemed to be. Now in Britain there are only 2 Alhambras. There's us here in Dunfermline, and there's Alhambra in Bradford. Quite funny actually. Sometimes people book tickets for the Alhambra and get them mixed.
Well, yeah, I was even getting that just looking at TripAdvisor comments. I was getting confused with which Alhambra I was looking at. But no, so it is confusing. And we saw as well that the Queen received the freedom of Dunfermline in the Alhambra.
The Queen Mother, and well, she wasn't the Queen Mother then, obviously. She was the Duchess of York and the Duke of York, who became King George VI. They received the freedom of the city of Dunfermline on the stage of the Alhambra in 1928.
I mean, to choose this building.
Well, it was the biggest venue at that time in Dunfermline.
Yeah, so it was a question of practicality.
Yes.
More than symbolism.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And what would you think makes the Alhambra like unique to this place and to this community?
Well, up until reopened as the theatre in 2008, people had to go to Edinburgh, Glasgow, for proper theatre. We've got the Carnegie Hall in Dunfermline, but it is what it says, it's just a hall. It was built as a concert hall, it only holds 512 people. And the shows it does are fine, but they're limited by the size of it. Whereas we have the wherewithal to get full stage shows to come in. Yeah. As you can see with tonight, you know.
Yeah, and so you were mentioning before your role as a historian here and your motivations to wanting to become a historian here, and I wondered if you could develop on that.
I've always been interested in history, especially to do with Dunfermline, and I've always been interested in cinemas. I was an electrician, so I knew how cinemas operated. In fact, you've probably not seen the film Empire of Light, which is just out. That was like manna to me, because that let me see how they were saying that the cinemas operated, and most of it was correct. Some of it wasn't, but most of it was correct. Because that was when I was a young apprentice. That was how cinemas did operate, in that depiction.
Can I ask you what was incorrect, just for curiosity?
It was supposed to be set in the early 1980s, and they were still showing that they were using arc lamps in the projector. By that time, they were large halogen lamps that they were using.
Crazy.
It's just wee things, you know.
But you noticed when...
Somebody like me would notice. Most ordinary people wouldn't have any idea that was wrong. You know?
No, of course.
Yeah, exactly.
I wouldn't have known possibly.
No, But so is there anything about the Alhambra specifically for you?
Well, as I say, I came here as a boy when it was a cinema. I used to come here every Saturday morning to Saturday morning matinees. And when I saw that the bingo had closed, I wondered what was going to happen. So when Bill took it over, they were looking for volunteers to act as stewards, and so I put my name down, and I've been here ever since.
Wow. So I'm
now one of the board of trustees as well.
So this place has seen you grow up. And that's like.
And plus, my parents used to come here as well when they were young too, you know.
So there's an emotional aspect. And do you think that's like this building has this sort of impact on all the other people?
I think so. Some of the older people do remember it as a cinema and a bingo hall, and they're glad that it's still functioning, you know.
That was kept. No, I'm just having everything go into my brain. It's just so interesting.
It's wonderful how there's still places. You know, it becomes rarer and rarer. You know, and now that there's places that manage to last
you take Dundee. Dundee doesn't have a proper theatre. There's nothing wrong with the White Hall or the Kate Hall, but the White Hall is small, and the Kate Hall is a concert hall. It's not a proper theatre, you know. Whereas Dundee at one time did have quite a few theatres. There's still the remnants, I believe, of the King's Theatre in Dundee. which had been a nightclub
Yes.
and various other things.
True, is what I was about to say.
And even just in St Andrews, I mean, we have we have the Bar Theatre, and then
Yes, but
yeah,
Yeah,
we
have
have two.
have you
You've got the,
seen-
you've got the
Yeah,
new
exactly.
cinema. There used to be
Theatre
two
is-
cinemas in St Andrews as well.
yeah, true.
Yeah.
Well, we do have two, right? We have the Bar Theatre and the
Yeah, but there was-
Yes, but the
There was-
Biotheatre is university.
There was another theatre,
Yeah.
another cinema in
Okay,
St Andrews at one time as well.
yeah.
like independent from the university.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In town. Yeah, but like talking about proper theatre, like I
Yeah.
think this is
Yeah. Exactly.
the most proper theatre I've ever seen.
I
Like
mean,
this
yeah.
is what
Yeah.
theatre was at the times of the golden age of
Yeah.
performance. It's incredible, and I love the fact that. Like you said, you said we are trying to keep it as authentic as possible. But
yeah.
the bar is incredibly
Yeah.
like it's very rare
Yeah.
to see something like this, and I'm very happy.
I could tell
Honestly.
a wee story about that bar.
Oh please.
When we were getting ready for reopening in 2008, there was a cinema complex over at Fort Kinnaird which was closing. We got the seats out the cinema complex, and also the Frankie and Benny's was closing as well.
Oh.
So all the bar stuff, which is sort of looks 1920s, that came from Frankie and
Freaking
Benny's.
pennies. Okay. No way. About the fake wall that they put up while it was a bingo hall then, and then you tore it down when it was real.
Yeah.
But so they put that wall in. Why?
They didn't need the capacity.
So they just okay.
Yeah, just to reduce the capacity.
Yeah, and like you were saying, it's crazy that they just built a fake wall instead of destroying it and
Yeah.
making it.
But they just
smaller.
put a fake wall across it. All the old seating was still behind the fake wall.
But so there was like a care, even while it was a bingo hall for that time,
Yeah.
to keep.
Caledonian
house-
Associated Cinemas were very good at looking after their buildings. So the building was well maintained.
And they made a point of that.
Yeah,
Did the transition to bingo happen under Caledonian?
it did. Yes.
Okay, not
Yeah.
under Carlton Bingo.
No.
Okay.
As I said, what CAC, Caledonian Associated Cinemas, bought the cinema in Eastport. And what they did was, they started up there with bingo, because bingo was just starting off early in the late 50s. They bought that and they saw it was going to be quite a money generating thing. So what they did was they did a swap. The cinema from here went up to the cinema in the centre of the town, and the bingo came down here.
Oh, the transition from silent to sound in films. Did
Yeah.
the Alhambra benefit from that then?
When the Alhambra started, obviously it was silent. It was silent up until 1930, and then it went over to talkies in 1930.
Because I saw that that J.B. Milne really I saw quickly that he really believed in talkies, and that so he really pursued that, and
Yeah.
that he possibly brought that to the Alhambra.
No, of course, J.B. Milne didn't come to the Alhambra till
And
1948.
so that's not true then.
Yeah,
Okay.
but true for the rest of his cinemas.
Yeah.
But this wasn't his cinema then.
Yeah. So it already had gone
Yeah.
through that transition.
It was when the Alhambra was formed. It was a group of Dunfermline businessmen who set up the Alhambra Dunfermline Limited, and they ran it until 1948. And then obviously must have had a good offer for it, and sold out to J.B. Milne.
Because it always had both the cinema aspect and then the theatre, having both live shows and cinema
Yeah.
at the same time and balancing that. And
For the first 2 years, that was what they did. It was mainly live shows, but they did have cinema in between some of the live shows.
yeah,
And then, as I say, Henry Hare decided that it would be better to use the Alhambra as a big cinema
yeah,
because of the capacity and the live shows up to the
yeah.
Opera House.
And now we again have both.
Yeah.
Now, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, there was a movie called The Happy Lands
Yeah.
that premiered here,
Yeah.
and we know an actor that played a small role in it, D.T. Wilson.
Yeah.
So we were wondering if there were a lot of premieres like that going on at the time. Or
No, that was the main premiere that we had was the Happy Lands.
And because obviously
Because it was a lot of local people took part in it.
Yeah.
Gordon Brown was here for the premiere as well, you know.
Yeah.
that was quite interesting. Like having all his security check the place out.
And so, what was like that night like, or what sort of impact did that have?
It was a really good night. It was the place was full right up to the rafters.
Oh wow!
The place was completely packed.
And since it was,
in fact, if you look on that the Scottish cinema site, you'll see one or two pictures that I've put on of that night.
of the premiere.
Yeah,
You
of the
put those
premiere.
on?
Yeah.
Because since it's because our research, we're making it, so obviously we're making it about this theatre, and our kind of through line is the community.
Yeah.
Like is the community, and so since that's a movie about the community.
Community, called the community.
Yeah.
A lot of the actors were amateur actors that took part in it.
Yeah, and I think D.T. Wilson, that's a case of him as well. And he's helping out with like student films in St Andrews sometimes and stuff. And like having a film about the community play in a place that's so important to the community.
Yeah.
That sort of relationship.
Yeah.
And even like we were also trying to look at the way the owners of the cinema, like J.B. Milton might have given back to the community, or you were mentioning that they did to open the theatre, they did a charity event.
Well, Alhambra Dunfermline Limited, as it was, as I said, the day before it opened, it had an orchestral concert in aid of there was no National Health Service, in aid of the funds for the local hospital.
Yeah.
So,
and
plus it was a Sunday, so they were restricted what they could do on a Sunday as well.
Because obviously. And we saw that J.B. Milne, there was like there was a pit explosion in the 40s, the Whitehaven pit explosion.
Yeah.
And with the Alhambra and the theatres that he owned in the area, like put up a fund.
Yeah.
So there's this like constant back and forth.
You found that the local cinemas did interact with the community quite a bit. You know, at Christmas time, they gave kids Christmas shows. One of the other cinemas in Dunfermline, your fee for getting into the Christmas show was a packet of tea. And the tea was distributed amongst all the pensioners in the town.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
And so it was like a tradition to have that sort of back and forth with it.
Yeah.
And so the Alhambra had that as well, strongly.
They would have similar things, yeah.
Yeah. Would you have any like more examples? I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but
down in the foyer, just as you come in the front door, there's 4 sets of vintage pictures on the wall.
Oh, amazing!
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome.
It's really
Thank you so much.
appreciated. Yeah, the last question. I'm sorry. Oh no, it's okay. What was your last question?
Damn! That was crazy. That was so.
That was really important for us when we reopened. I think that people have an image in their head of what a theatre looks like, you know.
Yes.
So we play up to that as much as possible. You know, the deep reds, the golds, all that sort of thing. Not everything you see is original. There is a lot of original features left, of course, but I think we've been quite sensitive in what we've brought in. I think we're very, you know, it's suits the building. It's of its time, I think.
Yeah, because we were we went kind of through the history with Ian of like everything. We gave him a timeline of what we had, and he corrected some stuff.
Okay.
And we just ended up talking about the premiere of the Happy Lands.
Yes.
Here, and we were explaining that our through line for our research is the community aspect and the giving back and forth. So I was wondering if you had any kind of comments on that, on like the theatre given to the community and the community giving back to the theatre.
Yeah, definitely. You know, this is a big old theatre in a small town, and there's not many of those left. You know, there used to be on every corner. You know, until television took over, and suddenly people had other things to do other than go out to the theatre. You know, so bringing this place back, we knew that it had to be for the people. You know, we can't do this kind of show every night as much as we might like to. You know, we have to appeal to as wide an audience as possible. So we are not. We try not to be too. it's not what I like, you know, to put on. It's what the people want. You know? I think that's where a lot of major theatres tend to go quite wrong. I think is they don't make the programme populist enough. But we think that's very important. You know? And I think that doing that has helped to cement our place in the local community again. Because this place never really operated as a theatre when it first opened, you know. Maybe only operated as a theatre for 10 years before it turned into a cinema, before it turned into a bingo hall. There's a smaller theatre up the road, but apart from that, there's never really been a theatre culture in Dunfermline, so we've had to try and build that. And the only way to do that is to get as many different kinds of people through the door as possible. So we'll do opera, we do all the big name touring comedians, we do West End musicals, we take the seats out and do rock gigs. We try and make the place as easy as possible for local groups to hire. You know, the local children's gala, hire it for a fundraiser, local dance schools, acrobatic groups, all sorts. You know, it's been used for political hustings. Like I say, we did the Happy Lands premiere. That was a free event, which was quite interesting. That was at the time, I think it was I think we worked out that was the biggest cinema audience in Scotland that year or something like that, because there's no cinemas big enough to hold 1,200 people. So you know, we sold the place out for, well, we didn't sell it. It was a free event, but the place was packed to the rafters, and it was all people from the local ex-mining communities who were in, the sort of people who might not normally come into a theatre. So we kind of think that those kind of things they're important to what we do, you know, bringing people in who might not normally come into theatres is important, because that's the way that we try and build that culture back again. Yeah,
and Ian was explaining to us that the reason
it's so hot in here. I'm sorry. It's absolutely. Can I open a window?
Because Ian was just explaining to us that the reason that this building is still, the interior is still as authentic, is because a theatre nearby didn't have the same fate, and it lost. It was destroyed.
Yeah, it was a fire.
And so that's why it was so important for the community that throughout the huge time where it was a bingo hall, even with the fake wall and everything, that it stayed intact.
It did. You know, the bingo, we've got a lot to thank the bingo for. You know, they took a lot of care of the building. They weren't too fussy about playing up its features and making the most of them, but they kept the place wind and watertight for decades. You know, which meant that when we came in, our job was a good bit easier than others who might look to do the same in similar venues around Scotland. Although there is in Kirkcaldy, just along the road, there's an old theatre there called the King's Theatre, and there's people with ambitions who want to reopen that in much the same way, but it's not been taken care of in the same way. They didn't have the bingo to look after it for 40, 50 years like we luckily had here, and they'll never manage it, you know, because the roof is in terrible shape. It'll cost them 10-15 million pounds to do it up, and they'll never get that kind of money these days, you know. So yeah, Dunfermline was lucky with this place, but it's still been a long road getting it from there to where it is now.
Yeah, I was about to ask about that, like the restoration process, or what there was to change, or even Ian was telling us like the seats are new and stuff like that, like those sort of processes. Yeah,
so we're an independent theatre, again, which is another reason why the Alhambra is very unique. Most other theatres are they're council run, or they're the few that aren't are the Playhouse in Edinburgh, or the bigger ones in Glasgow, which are owned by ETG or giant corporate monoliths like that. But we're entirely independent. But we operate as a charity, so all the profits go straight back into the building. And that's just what we've done for 13, 14 years. You know, when we reopened, it didn't look like this, far from it. You know, So that's been a constant process since we opened the doors again. Repair, improve, it's a constant cycle. But we're always looking for ways to improve the building as well. Like we can't stand still because there's so much competition now for people's free time and their money. You know, you can at the cinema you can go and get a big reclining armchair or a big sofa to sit in, you know. And if you don't want to come out of the house at all, you can be entertained with your phone, palm of your hand, or streaming services. And nobody's bored anymore, you know. So we've got to work really hard to get people in through the doors. So you make the most of what we have. The seats were 100 years old and built for when people were much shorter, you know, and less used to the comforts that we are today. And I think, you know, asking people to come in and pay £30, £40 a ticket to sit in seats like that, theatres can't get away with that for too much longer. So we had to take a massive step, certainly financially, but then also making a big call. We ripped everything out, we re-stepped the balcony to try and create better leg room, things like that. So, you know, we have a very traditional theatre, but the seating is very modern. So you're able to come in and get really good leg room, a nice comfortable wide seat. You won't find that in many other traditional theatres, but we kind of think if there's going to be any future here, so we've got to keep an eye on that kind of thing. You know?
Yes, so it was a balance between getting people in because it's traditional and getting people in because you want to sit there and spend your time in it.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. It's not easy to, like, it's a huge building. It needs constant repair. The roof needs constant attention all the time. We've painted every inch of the building 2 or 3 times in those 13 years. You can't let the place get untidy or tired looking, you know. Yeah. That's a major thing for us.
And so, because a big piece of information also that we're trying to look for is when it did reopen in 2008, what was the role of the community in getting it to reopen?
Yeah, sure. So the theatre was bought by local businessmen. That was in conjunction with a chap called Paul Gurgeon, who at that time was chair of the Edinburgh Festival Fringe. So I think he had originally approached Bill, who was a property developer at the time, about the Alhambra. So Bill bought the building, and then the pair of them initially took on the task of the refurbishment, and then that was Bill primarily that led on that, and Paul primarily led on the early programme. So he was able to use his contacts and his experience in selling a new venue to promoters. We started a process around that time called Alhambra Alive, and that was designed to just to raise awareness in the community that this was a big opportunity and an exciting new thing that was happening in Dunfermline. We used various events with under the umbrella of Alhambra Alive to do some initial fundraising to help us buy equipment and things like that. The group Alhambra Alive was there was a board, and then that board put together various kind of fundraising events. There was like a big Christmas carol concert and things like that. But it was a good way of getting people through the door, because you know not everybody knew that what this place was. You know, I mean, I grew up in this town, and I only knew this place as the Bingo. You know, I didn't know that it had been a major theatre. That would have been exciting to know that, but people had no idea. It was almost like it had gotten forgotten about. You know, so the Bingo they used the bits that they needed. The rest of it got just kind of covered up, and so it didn't have this look, and some people didn't really know what they had. You know, so those initial Alhambra Live events, we did open days, we did tours and things like that. It helped to just to raise awareness and establish the place in people's minds again.
Yeah, and do you have any? Because since you didn't know it was a theatre, like what was your personal attachment to being involved with that and participating in making this theatre part of the fabric of the community again?
Yeah, but it was a really interesting process, and like I say, as somebody from the town, I was immediately passionate about the potential of the place as well. And you can feel that with every person that came through the door. People would come through and they'd be amazed. You know, they had no idea really. You know, unless they'd come to the bingo, then they wouldn't know. You know, and the people that come to the bingo were all old ladies. You know, so there was whole generations and whole demographics who had no idea about this place. So you constantly for years, and you still see it now. People even from the local area, they come through the door and they're like, I had no idea. You know. So that's always a fun thing to see. It still, like I say, it still happens to this day.
It must be satisfying.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And now it's funny now because people come in and they're grown-ups now and they say, oh yeah, I used to come here when I was a kid, and that always that makes me feel old. But it's that's a nice thing to hear as well, because it means that this place is becoming tradition. It means it's becoming once again part of Dunfermline's history.
Yeah. Do you want to?
I don't think I have any other questions. You've been super helpful, because obviously the role of the community is more something that we will find more in people's experience in people's story with this theatre, rather than in archives and in research.
Definitely. Yeah.
So it was really nice to speak with you about your personal attachment to this theatre, and have the second view as well with Ian. That was incredible.
Yeah. And that he lived through like a lot of.
Ian's got a really interesting take on it all, because he's been passionate about buildings like these since he was a little boy, and I'm sure he told you he used to come here when he was a little boy, and if he wasn't here, he'd be in the other cinemas or theatres around
yes,
town.
He did say that.
And so he's been a major part of what we've done. He's done it all as a volunteer, but you can tell it means so much to him. History in general means a lot to him, history of the town, but especially this building as well. So he's very passionate about that. That's good to see. Yeah.
And just bouncing off on the history, like, do you think what would you think are like the most like pivotal points in history for the Alhambra? If that's not too
no. I mean, I'm only I've been here since day one of this part of the Alhambra's story, if you will. I can't really speak too much for the 80 or 85 years kind of before that. I find it fascinating that it never really took off as a theatre when it first opened. That's really interesting to me. And I find it really interesting as well that there were so many cinemas and theatres in the town at that time as well. It makes you think, things were so different back then, So unless you were, out at the theatre or the cinema, what were you doing, staring at the walls in your house, So you need to get out there, and there'd be people queued around the block waiting on one film finishing and the next one starting. I just think that's such a different time. We've got no idea, But I think that buildings like this, I always think they retain a certain energy. Theatres, stadiums, and things like that, places where people congregate en masse. And I think you feel it when you come through the door. This is a place where people have, it's designed to have a good time in here. So that's just what we do. Can't lose sight of that.
Yeah. It's crazy that it couldn't balance being. It had to choose between being a theatre or a cinema, and it was both.
Yes.
Also, that's pretty. That's pretty cool.
Sure.
Do you think it took off, particularly as a cinema, because of the role that cinema had in those years? Like cinema was in the whole.
That was the new thing.
Yes, it was the new thing. It was the golden age of.
That's right.
Of cinema at the time, and so theatre was kind of like going in the background of this new phenomenon.
Well, theatre has probably already begun to. Your traditional kind of variety style theatre would have begun to die out around about that time. they didn't need it. They had films.
But now today it can come back because it became like a vintage trend. It's more unusual, so people want to see it. And
well, yeah, yes and no. But I mean, we don't do much in the way of traditional style theatre. You know, not the kind of variety theatre that would have been fashionable when the place was first built in the 1920s. You know, nowadays it's a lot more live music. You know, and it's a lot more, you know, big for comedians. I suppose you would have had comedians back then as well, but so it's a different sort of style. You know, if you look back at the listings for any kind of night at the Alhambra back then, it'd be 8, 9, 10 different acts who were on. You don't get theatres don't do that sort of thing anymore. People would come to see anything. You know, and you definitely can't get away with that now. You know, it's got to be the real standard. It's got to be something that's known nationwide, or people wouldn't take a chance. You know, so we don't operate as many nights as the place would have done when it first opened. It would have been open every night of the week, probably. You know, it may have only been closed on Christmas Day, and even maybe not even then. But we could only maybe get away with opening every Friday, Saturday night. Maybe do 120 nights a year, something like that, maximum. But that's just the way the theatre culture's changed over the years.
Now, also, do you think that could be partially because it's gone from being owned by these like big owners of like big cinema chains to being independent? Like we were talking about CAC and JB Milne with Ian. And like their role or their impact on the cinema compared to now it being independent. Yeah, well, they would have had content which would go from cinema to cinema, theatre to theatre. You know, so there's not as much as that anymore. There's still an element of that, but not so many of these kind of national kind of companies. And they maybe looked less to cater to the local demands versus now as well.
Yeah.
Okay. We were also just asking Ian before if you would have any like original pictures or material to show us as well, or anything that we could use.
I can send you lots of stuff. In the foyer downstairs, there's old photographs of the place from 100 years ago, and they're really interesting to see.
Okay,
but
we should
you know, I mean, what
that.
time is it now? That's not even 7 o'clock yet. Feel free to wander around the theatre, get a feel for the place.
Oh, please, thank you.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah. There's nobody in the balcony tonight, so if you guys want to stay and watch any of the show, just sit up in the balcony. But have a wander around just now. I can take you backstage as well if you like.
Oh, that would be great.
It's quite busy. It's full of, there's about 100 in the cast and an orchestra and everything tonight. But yeah,
backstage would be very interesting.
To get a look at.
Obviously, we don't want to disturb. We don't want to bother the performers because obviously they're training. We don't like they're exercising for tonight. We don't want to be in the middle.
It's not as glamorous as you think. Back they're probably always sitting eating McDonald's and things like that.
That's not a bad idea. But yeah, no, that would be fantastic.
Sure. Let's do that now.
Okay,
We'll stop recording.